You know the feeling when you've already refreshed the app 5 times by 9 a.m. on payday because a bill is due and you've got $47 to your name? Choosing the frozen burger over the grass-fed beef to save $10, the sudden car breakdown and the transmission quote you can't afford, then one day, you hit your first milestone of $2,500, you look at the savings account and you feel, relief, but mostly it's just quiet. The money is there. You already knew it would be before you opened the app, but it's not freedom, one real emergency, and you're back to credit cards and borrowing money. But that background angst you'd lived with for so long, you forgot it was there? Gone. My name is Michael, and I love going down rabbit holes into the psychology of money. For example, how someone pulling in 6 figures can be one step away from financial disaster, while someone making $40,000 a year is closing in on financial freedom, even if they started in the exact same place. Most personal finance content is going to tell you to save 3 to 6 months of expenses, and that advice isn't wrong. It's just useless when you've got $47 in your account and a check engine light staring at you. What they don't tell you is that once you do start saving, it doesn't feel like one long, gradual climb. And there's one point where instead of feeling better, you actually feel more uncomfortable than when you had nothing. That's the second milestone. But according to behavioral economists, it all started at $2,500. But why $2,500? Because $2,500 doesn't feel like much on paper. It's not a vacation. It's not a car. It won't cover a month's rent in most cities. But that's not what it's for. Your brain has a threat detection system called the amygdala. Its entire job is to scan for danger, and when you're living with nothing in your account, it never switches off. Every notification, every unexpected letter, every weird noise from your car, your nervous system treats all of it as a potential emergency. One thing goes wrong, and the whole structure collapses. $2,500 is the number that finally gives the amygdala something to work with. Not freedom, not security, just enough signal to stand down. And the strange thing is you don't feel relief when you hit it. It doesn't feel dramatic at all. But what you feel instead is an absence. That low hum of dread that had been running in the background so long, you thought it was just part of you, until it stops. You open the bank app only out of habit, not panic. The check engine light comes on, and the first thought isn't, how am I going to pay for this? It's just, I'll get that looked at this week. That's not a small thing. That's your brain coming offline from a threat response it had been running continuously, possibly for years. The research backs this up. Studies on financial stress show that even a modest liquid buffer, money you can access immediately, produces measurable reductions in cortisol, your body's primary stress hormone. The effect isn't proportional to the amount. Going from $0 to $2,500 produces a larger psychological shift than going from $50,000 to $100,000. The first buffer is the most powerful one you'll ever build. But here's what nobody tells you about this milestone. It doesn't change your circumstances. One real emergency, and you're back to borrowing and maxing out your credit card. What it changes is your baseline, the starting point from which every decision gets made. And a calmer baseline means better decisions, clearer thinking at work, more patience at home, less of your mental energy disappearing into calculations that used to run all day without you even noticing. $2,500 doesn't buy you a better life. It buys you a quieter mind, and a quieter mind is where everything else starts. $2,500 gave you a quieter mind, so you'd think $8,000 would just be more of that. It's not. Most people hit $8,000 and feel something they weren't expecting. Not excitement, not relief, just this low-level unease that kind of sits with you. And it doesn't make sense on paper because you've got more saved than you've ever had in your life. So why does something feel off? Now, before we get into that, why $8,000 and not $10,000? Because everyone says $10,000. It's the number that gets thrown around in every finance video, every blog post, every conversation about savings. But $10,000 is a round number that looks clean on a thumbnail. The actual research tells a different story. Behavioral economists consistently find the psychological shift happens somewhere between $7,000 and $9,000, when your savings can cover the two most common simultaneous financial hits at the same time. Most people just round up to $10,000 because it sounds better. We're not here for what sounds better. We're here for what's actually true. And what's actually true is $8,000 is where it happens. So, why does it feel uncomfortable? It's because you've never had anything to lose before. That sounds dramatic, but it's not. It's just new. For most of your life, money came in and went out, and the whole emotional experience of it was about not having enough. But now, there's something sitting there that you actually built, and your brain is still catching up to that. You'll notice it in small ways. You think twice before a spontaneous purchase, not in a paralyzed way, just a beat longer than before. Someone suggests a weekend away, and there's this quiet voice at the back of your head that wasn't there 6 months ago. Not saying no, just asking the question. That's it. That's the whole feeling. It's not dramatic, it's just unfamiliar. And it passes. Usually within a few weeks of sitting with it, you start to notice something else underneath it. A kind of steadiness, like the ground beneath you got slightly more solid without you noticing exactly when it happened. The decisions start feeling different too. Not big dramatic life changes, just small shifts. You're a bit less likely to say yes to something that doesn't sit right, a bit more willing to push back on something that's been bothering you. The job that's been grinding you down gets a quiet expiry date in your head, not because you're about to do anything about it, just because for the first time the option exists. That's what $8,000 actually does. It doesn't transform your life overnight. It just quietly changes the options that feel available to you. $2,500 turn the noise down. $8,000 changes the channel. $30,000 is a different conversation entirely, not a different chapter, a different book. And here's the thing, nobody tells you about getting here. Your brain actually starts working differently. Not metaphorically, literally. When you're in survival mode, your mind has one job. Get through this week, that's it. Everything else gets filtered out because it's not relevant to immediate survival. Opportunities, ideas, long-term thinking. Your brain doesn't have the bandwidth for any of that when it's managing a crisis that never ends. But at $30,000, something unlocks. You start seeing things you genuinely couldn't see before. Not because they weren't there. They were always there. But your mind was too busy running the numbers on whether you could afford lunch to notice them. All of a sudden, you're looking at the world differently. A business idea that used to feel like a fantasy starts feeling like a plan. A conversation that used to feel like someone else's life starts feeling like a direction. And the numbers start shifting too. When you're at zero, saving $2,500 feels enormous. Impossible even. But once you've done it, once you've gone from zero to $2,500 to $8,000 to $30,000, something happens to how you see the next number. $100,000 doesn't feel like a different universe anymore. It feels like the same process you've already done. Just longer. The momentum is already there. The identity is already there. You're not someone trying to save money anymore. You're someone who saves money, and that person doesn't stop at $30,000. People say making your first million is the hardest. And it's not because the math gets easier after that. It's because the person you became while getting there is completely different from the person who started. The first stretch rewires you. Everything after that is just the same wiring doing what it already knows how to do. You're not at $1 million yet, but at $30,000, you're running on that same wiring for the first time. Now why $30,000 specifically? Because $30,000 represents something concrete. It's roughly 6 to 8 months of average living expenses for most people. And that's the threshold where stress researchers consistently see anxiety responses around money drop significantly. Below that number, you're still one bad year away from starting over. At $30,000, you're not, and your nervous system knows it before your brain does. Because up until now, everything has been about protection. $2,500 protected your nervous system. $8,000 protected your options. But when you hit $30,000, you're not building walls anymore. That part's done. And for maybe the first time in your adult life, you're standing somewhere solid enough to actually look up and ask, okay, what do I actually want? And that question hits differently when you're not broke. The practical stuff is just handled at this point. Transmission goes fine. Landlord raises the rent, annoying but not catastrophic. You get laid off, you've got 6 to 8 months of runway to find something better, not just something available. The things that would have wiped you out 2 years ago are now just problems with a price tag. You solve them and you move on, and they don't follow you home anymore. But that's almost the least interesting part of this milestone. Think about something you've been sitting on for a while. Maybe it's finally getting your own place instead of splitting rent with roommates at 34. Maybe it's taking 6 weeks off between jobs without telling your family and pretending everything's fine. Maybe it's that business idea you've been turning over in your head for 3 years that you've never actually done anything about because the timing was never right. At $30,000, the timing starts feeling different. Not perfect, just possible. And possible is all you ever needed. You start having different conversations too. The guy at work who left to start something on his own, you used to half listen to that story. Now you're asking questions. The opportunity that would have required you to take a pay cut for 6 months, you used to dismiss that before it finished loading. Now you're actually running the numbers. Not because you've suddenly become a different person, but because your circumstances finally caught up to the version of you that always knew there was more available. There's something else that's hard to explain, but you'll feel it. A slowness. Not laziness, just the absence of urgency that used to run underneath everything. You stop saying yes to things just because you need the money. You stop taking on the extra shift, the annoying client, the job that pays okay but makes you miserable, just because the alternative felt impossible. You start being selective in a way that it used to feel like a luxury. And the people around you notice, not because you're talking about your savings account, just because there's a quality to how you move now, a patience. You're not chasing everything that comes past you. And that energy, that lack of desperation, attracts a different kind of opportunity than the one you used to get. The optimizing starts here too. And honestly, it's almost enjoyable because it's not survival anymore. You're not cutting the grocery budget to make rent. You're looking at what your money could be doing instead of just sitting there. You're thinking about whether your salary actually reflects what you're worth now. Small decisions that don't feel urgent, but compound quietly over time into something significant. The mindset shift is the biggest thing, though, and it's hard to put into words for someone who hasn't felt it yet. You stop asking what you can afford. You start asking what you want to do next. That sounds like a small thing. It's not. One question lives in a cage. The other one doesn't. $2,500 turned the noise down. $8,000 changed the channel. $30,000 changes who's holding the remote. Think about the last time you checked your bank account and felt nothing. Not relief, not dread, just a number on a screen. If that's never happened to you, it will. And when it does, you probably won't even notice it at first. That's the thing about these shifts. They don't announce themselves. They don't come with a notification or a moment of clarity. You just realize one day that something that used to cost you sleep doesn't anymore. That a conversation you used to dread having with yourself has gone quiet. That the version of you refreshing the app 5 times on payday, waiting, bracing, feels like someone you used to know. The $47 doesn't disappear overnight. The grass-fed beef doesn't suddenly stop mattering. But the weight of it changes. And then one day the weight is just gone. And you're standing somewhere you always assumed other people got to stand. You were always capable of getting here. The only thing that was ever in the way was not knowing what here actually felt like. So tell me, has anything in this video changed how you think about your savings? And if you're already past one of these milestones, what did it actually feel like when you got there?